The lake was glass that night, just a soft ripple tapping against the dock, the smell of pine sap warming in the last stretch of sun. I was rinsing off a coffee mug when I saw the certified envelope wedged into the screen door. Return address: Whitaker, HOA president. I already knew it wouldn't be neighborly. Inside was a 3-page community development proposal, clean letterhead, polite tone. Suggested I transfer my lake cabin to her son at what she called a fair internal rate, so the association could support future youth recreation planning. A generous vision, apparently. Buried near the end was the real message. If I wasn't open to cooperative discussion, the board would be forced to address several pending architectural violations on my property. Funny thing is, I don't have any pending violations. What Marlene didn't know was that I still had the original subdivision plat rolled up in my garage, and there's a thin pencil line on that map most people would never notice, especially not someone who thinks paved parking lots make land theirs. I folded the letter slow and careful. This wasn't the first time power tried leaning on me. I'm 58 years old, retired survey technician, 32 years walking property lines with a transit and a steel tape before GPS made it easy. I've never been flashy, never needed to be. The mortgage on this cabin's been paid off for 7 years. I keep my tools clean, my receipts filed, and my words straight. My wife, Carol, helped me build that dock the summer before she got sick. We set every post ourselves, waist deep in cold water, laughing when the level said we were off by half an inch. Measure twice, cut once, she used to say, like it was scripture. I still hear it when I'm working. This place isn't luxury, it's legacy. My dad poured the original footings back in '78, sweat running through sawdust on his boots. Every board holds a fingerprint from someone I loved, and in my garage, tucked inside a weathered drafting tube, I keep copies of the original subdivision plats from my early days on this project. Legacy doesn't intimidate entitlement, and Marlene Whitaker is used to getting her way. Marlene Whitaker doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't have to. Former real estate broker. Perfect posture. Nails always done. She calls herself a protector of property values, like she's guarding sacred ground, instead of running a lakeside HOA with 84 homes and a modest annual budget. Her son moved back last year after a development project in Phoenix folded. From what I hear, investors weren't thrilled. Suddenly he needed a reset. A quiet place. Waterfront would be ideal. At meetings, Marlene speaks in tidy paragraphs. Fiduciary responsibility, covenant compliance, long-term appreciation strategy. She smiles thinly when someone disagrees, like she's indulging a child. Most of the board sides with her. People tend to follow confidence, especially when it's dressed in legal language. Last spring, she oversaw the relocation of the HOA office. They moved records from a rented strip mall suite into a small, standalone building near the main access road. Fresh siding, new signage, and a paved parking lot that wasn't there before. She called it modernization. What she called Phase 2 acquisition sounded familiar to me for a different reason. When I declined her offer, politely and in writing, the paperwork began. The first notice claimed my dock encroached 3 feet into a community setback. That dock has been there 12 years, inspected twice, approved in writing. A week later, I was fined for unauthorized exterior stain color. Same cedar tone it's earned since Carol brushed it on. Then came the letter about a shoreline maple, apparently threatening erosion patterns that hadn't changed in decades. Certified envelopes started arriving every Friday like clockwork. Crisp paper, bold headings, numbers climbing. They even zip-tied a violation notice to my front gate one afternoon. I came home from the hardware store to find 2 neighbors reading it. By the 3rd board meeting, the total sat at $4,800. Marlene leaned forward, fingers laced, voice smooth. She suggested mediation, if I was open to reasonable asset transitions that benefit the community. There it was again. I didn't argue. I asked for copies instead. Architectural committee minutes, enforcement logs, records of similar violations issued in the past 5 years. Her smile tightened. The threat of a lien was mentioned before the meeting adjourned. I drove home slow that night, windows down, letting the cool lake air settle me. Then I walked into my garage, climbed a step stool, and pulled down a dusty drafting tube I hadn't opened in years. I cleared the workbench and unrolled the plat like I was laying out an old memory. The paper was brittle at the edges, corners curled and stained, with rings from coffee long evaporated. Faded blue ink traced lot numbers and setback lines in careful, deliberate strokes. I ran my finger along the western boundary of my parcel, slow, steady. That's when I saw it again. A 20-foot utility, an ingress easement, cutting across the top corner, granted for road access during initial development. Retained by the original lakefront parcel. My parcel, an easement allows use. It doesn't transfer it. It doesn't transfer ownership, and it doesn't magically widen itself because someone wants more parking. I pulled county filings online and compared them against the recorded plat. When the HOA paved that new lot during their office expansion, they pushed asphalt well past the easement's recorded width. 11 feet past, by my rough scale. 11 feet might not sound like much, but if the parking lot sits outside the easement, then it sits on my land, which means access is permitted only within 20 feet. No more. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone. I hired a licensed surveyor I trusted and handed him copies without commentary. Just confirm the lines, I said. The survey stakes went into the ground on a quiet Tuesday morning, bright orange flags, marking a problem no one saw coming. The survey came back clean and precise. 11 feet of asphalt, plus the outer edge of their parking stalls, sat beyond the recorded 20-foot easement. Bright lines, no ambiguity. I took the packet to a property attorney in the next county over. Old brick office. Diplomas on the wall. He studied the plat, then the survey, then leaned back. You can't block the lawful easement, he said. They're entitled to 20 feet of ingress and utility access. I nodded. But anything outside that width is your land. Paving it doesn't make it theirs. Continued use beyond the easement boundary? That's trespass. He drafted a formal notice demanding correction within 30 days, remove encroaching pavement, or cease use beyond the easement width. Marlene's response came fast. Accusations of retaliation, claims that I was obstructing community operations, a thinly veiled threat of litigation for interference. I didn't argue, didn't respond emotionally. I ordered custom steel fencing cut to exact measurements and scheduled a crew. I wasn't building a wall. I was restoring a boundary. 30 days passed without compliance. On day 31, trucks arrived. The first post went in just after 8. A hydraulic driver thudded against steel, the sound carrying across the lake like a slow heartbeat. The crew worked methodically, lining each post exactly along the survey stakes. Bright orange flags replaced with dark powder-coated steel, straight as a rifle barrel. No drama, no shouting, just measurements honored. By noon, the fence traced the precise edge of the 20-foot easement. Clean, lawful, unapologetic. What it left behind was telling. The HOA office still had access, but only within that recorded width. Their wide parking apron narrowed to a tight corridor. 2 vehicles could squeeze in single file. The extra stalls? Gone. The turnaround space required for emergency vehicles? Questionable at best. I made a courtesy call to the county fire marshal and asked if he'd like to review the updated access conditions. That evening, residents showed up for the monthly board meeting and found congestion instead of convenience. Cars idled along the roadside. Confusion turned into murmurs. Marlene stepped out, heels sharp against asphalt, staring at the fence like it had insulted her personally. I kept my voice even. "I've preserved your easement," I said. Nothing more. By sunset, emails were flying. The next morning, she announced an emergency meeting to address my obstruction. They packed the clubhouse like it was a town hall before a storm. Folding chairs scraped against tile. Low murmurs. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and lake water drying on shoes. Marlene opened with composure. She called my fence retaliatory obstruction and accused me of undermining community operations. Her tone was steady, almost wounded. When she finished, I stood up with a thin folder in my hand. No speeches. just documents. I passed out copies of the certified survey showing the 11-foot encroachment, then the original county plat highlighting the 20-foot easement retained by my parcel. I laid out dated photos of the repaving during their office expansion. Finally, the attorney's notice sent 30 days prior. Quiet settled in. Then I added one more piece during my records request. I'd found no formal amendment to the easement terms. .no recorded expansion, no signed boundary adjustment, which meant their insurer likely believed the office operated fully within its legal footprint. If they'd been using land outside the easement, that wasn't just a technical mistake. That was uninsured trespass exposure. Board members shifted. Papers rustled. Someone whispered, "Is that true?" A neighbor stood up and asked why enforcement actions seemed concentrated on my property. Another admitted she'd been pressured to consider selling after disputing a landscaping fine. The room tilted. Marlene's smile was gone now. But exposure isn't collapse. By the following week, the county was involved. The fire marshal came out on a gray Thursday morning. He measured the narrowed drive, walked the curve where vehicles were supposed to turn around, and shook his head. Within a week, the HOA received a written citation, inadequate emergency access due to non-compliant layout. The extra pavement they'd relied on wasn't legally theirs to use. County zoning followed. They pulled permits from the office expansion and compared them to the recorded easement. There were discrepancies square footage that didn't quite match filings, improvements that extended beyond approved boundaries. Nothing dramatic, just enough. The board was ordered to remove the encroaching asphalt and submit engineered plans for a compliant redesign. Legal counsel warned of potential civil exposure for unauthorized use of private land. Then their insurance carrier issued a reservation of rights letter, signaling coverage might be limited if trespass was proven. That was the moment the tone changed. Marlene resigned 2 weeks later, citing personal reasons. Her son's interest in my cabin quietly evaporated. No apology came, but the pressure stopped. And with the noise finally gone, I had to decide what kind of neighbor I wanted to be next. Once the citation settled and the board found its footing again, I asked to speak. I offered a temporary shared parking agreement, strictly within the recorded easement, so meetings could continue while they figured out a permanent solution. I suggested they lease a small commercial suite in town instead of trying to anchor power on contested ground. Neutral space, cleaner books. I also proposed something simpler: publish enforcement logs quarterly and require a full board vote before issuing cumulative fines or liens. Transparency keeps everyone honest. They expected me to demand damages. I didn't. I accepted reimbursement for legal fees and survey costs, nothing more. Measure twice, I said, looking around the room. Cut once. The bylaws were amended that fall, limiting unilateral authority and tightening compliance procedures. The fence stayed where it belonged. The lake went back to sounding like water instead of paperwork. Legacy intact. Boundaries clear, and maybe a few more neighbors checking their own plats. I'll leave you with this. How many HOA offices are sitting on land they don't actually control? Most people assume asphalt means ownership. It doesn't. Paper does. Lines do. Recorded documents do. So I'm curious, if you were in my position, would you have sold or fought? Have you ever pulled your subdivision plat and actually looked at it? And here's the bigger question. When board members overstep, should they face personal liability for the damage they cause, or should the community always absorb the cost? Drop your thoughts below. I read more than you think, because this wasn't really about a fence. It was about boundaries, legal and otherwise. And next week, I'm walking you through a case involving a retired veteran who uncovered landscaping contracts quietly routed to his HOA president's brother. That one gets deeper. For now, the fence stands where the line always was. The lake's quiet again. Meferge twice, then act.